Laura and I recently marked 12 years of marriage, having been inseparable since the age of 10. After high school, instead of pursuing college, I took an entry-level draftsman position at Summit Engineering. A year later, Laura and I exchanged vows, and soon after, we were blessed with twin daughters, Grace and Hannah. The early days were tough, but through strict budgeting and hard work, we made it through. I gradually climbed the ranks at work, which significantly improved our finances. We bought a cozy home and owned 2 reliable cars. Not brand new, but far from being outdated. Laura fulfilled her lifelong aspiration of becoming a housewife. And thanks to our financial stability, she didn't have to work. Both of us stayed in good shape. Laura, now a little taller and fuller than on our wedding day, stood just over 5 feet, with dark brown hair and bangs that gave her a touch of charm reminiscent of a young Marie Osmond. As for me, I still maintained the broad physique I had as a high school football right tackle. About a year ago, Jake Thompson, someone I'd known from playing high school football in rival teams, moved to town. He also landed a job at Summit Engineering as a surveyor. We hit it off instantly and became fast friends. Jake had also married his high school sweetheart, Emma, a vivacious redhead. Laura and Emma became inseparable almost immediately. Though they didn't have kids, they often volunteered to watch Grace and Hannah when Laura and I were busy. While Jake and I bonded over football games and reminiscing, Laura and Emma developed a habit of spending hours shopping, hosting parties, and attending club meetings. Emma also started working as a secretary at Riverview Engineering about 6 months ago. Around that time, I began to notice peculiar changes in Laura's routine. For example, the monthly PTA meetings suddenly became weekly, and Emma, despite not having children, frequently joined Laura for these so-called gatherings. They also seemed to attend an endless stream of Tupperware and Magic Chef parties, but rarely bought anything. Laura's collection of lingerie grew inexplicably, yet I never saw her wear any of it for me. It was unsettling, but I kept quiet to avoid unnecessary conflict. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Laura returned home from yet another mysterious basket party. She had taken a shower before leaving and immediately took another one upon returning. Finding this odd, I quickly glanced at the basket she brought home and discovered a set of black lace lingerie. It baffled me. Who wears lingerie to a basket party? I don't usually snoop, but curiosity got the better of me that night. I checked her underwear and found it damp and sticky. For the first time in our marriage, I decided to look at Laura's phone. To my surprise, she hadn't deleted a single call. The majority of her conversations were with Emma, but there were frequent calls to numbers saved as KC, KH, and KW. It wasn't hard to deduce the initials stood for cell, home, and work. In her address book, Emma had 3 similar entries: Emma S, Emma H, and Emma W. It became apparent that Laura was contacting someone at Emma's workplace. Curious, I dialed KW's number from her phone. A voicemail greeted me, identifying the person as Mark Russell, who worked at Riverview Engineering. My heart sank. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Later that night, as Laura asked if I was coming to bed, I pretended to be engrossed in a book. I slept restlessly on the couch, my mind racing with doubts and questions. What had I done to drive her away? Could I have been a better husband? By morning, I resolved to confront her. The next day, as the girls left for school, I sat down across from Laura, coffee in hand. She looked at me with hesitation. Without mincing words, I asked her directly about her lies. At first, she dismissed my concerns, but I pressed on. Why did she claim to attend weekly PTA meetings when they were held monthly? Why did she take so many showers before and after her outings? Her answers were inconsistent and evasive. Finally, I confronted her with the soiled underwear I'd found. My voice trembled with frustration as I demanded the truth. What exactly had she been doing? Noticing the soiled underwear, I warned Laura against brushing it off as a yeast infection excuse. My frustration reached a boiling point, and I demanded a real explanation. She squirmed in her chair, avoiding eye contact, clearly at a loss for words. When I pressed her harder, she finally broke her silence but deflected, claiming she couldn't take the stress of this interrogation anymore. How could you treat me like this after 12 years of marriage? She asked, her voice trembling but defiant. Her constant lies and denial were unbearable. Fueled by anger, I hurled my half-full coffee cup across the room, the impact shattering the microwave's glass panel. Laura froze in shock. She had never seen me lose my temper like this before. Leaning over the table, I demanded to know about Mark Russell. She bolted from her chair, retreating to the sink, mumbling weakly that Mark was just a friend. Her words only fueled my rage. A friend? I bellowed. Are you sure that's all it is? Her voice quivered as she admitted to being close to him. When I asked point-blank if she had slept with him the night before, she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably at the sink. Yes, she whispered, barely audible, apologizing profusely. Her cell phone buzzed on the table. She nervously glanced between me and the phone, suggesting I answer it. The caller ID displayed Mark. I pressed the speaker button and greeted him, my voice steady and laced with sarcasm. Mark sounded uneasy, mentioning an attempted call on his work number the previous night. Laura stood paralyzed, her eyes fixed on me as if waiting for permission to speak. I took over the conversation. Mark, I said coolly, I'll be visiting you this afternoon. I'd suggest keeping emergency services on standby. The silence on the line was deafening before I ended the call and pocketed Laura's phone. Laura, now trembling in her robe, stayed silent. Before leaving, I asked one final question. Who's the guy Emma's been seeing? Her face crumpled, and she begged me not to bring Emma into this. In her desperation, she hurled another coffee cup across the kitchen, shattering it against the wall. Finally, she whispered a name, Calvin Bostic. She mentioned that she'd return in the afternoon and insisted I have my belongings cleared out before then. She also informed me that her mother would be staying with the girls temporarily and would assist in retrieving anything I couldn't take with me. Without another word, she turned away, leaving me to my thoughts as I walked out the door. I had no plan, but I knew I needed someone to talk to. Jake came to mind. He deserved to know what was happening with Emma and Laura. At Summit Engineering, Jake wasn't around, likely off at a site visit, so I called him. Hesitant at first, he listened as I revealed everything. Laura and Emma had been lying about their activities and were seeing other men. Jake was skeptical until I mentioned Calvin Bostic, a name that startled him. Calvin Bostic? He asked incredulously. I graduated with that guy. I added that Mark Russell was also involved and speculated that Emma might have introduced Laura to someone from her workplace. Jake, now livid, said he'd confront Emma directly. As I handed off my task to a colleague at work, Laura's phone rang again, this time displaying Emma's name. I answered, feigning Laura's voice. Emma, flustered, began apologizing. I was just trying to call Laura, she stammered. Billy knows about Calvin. He heard everything at the office. My anger simmered as I pressed her for more details. She revealed that Laura was busy packing her things to move back in with her parents temporarily. Tell Calvin that Billy's coming for him, I replied, relishing Emma's audible panic. He might want to start running now. Emma gasped, Oh God, no, before abruptly hanging up. Back in control of my emotions, I took swift action. Canceling our only credit card was easy. I changed the PIN on our debit card within minutes, leaving the joint checking account alone for now, since I needed it for bills. I just hoped Laura hadn't taken any account receipts with her. Later, Jake called me from jail, explaining he'd caught Calvin in Riverview Engineering's parking lot and beaten him senseless. Calvin was in the hospital, and Jake needed his brother from Lancaster to bail him out. I made the call, but knew there wasn't much else I could do for Jake. Needing a break, I grabbed lunch at Taco Bell before visiting my parents. They were appalled, but supportive. My mom offered to help with Grace and Hannah, staying with me during the week while the girls stayed at their place on weekends. With a clearer mind, I decided to pay Mark Russell a visit. Riverview's drafting department employees eagerly recounted Jake's dramatic confrontation with Calvin, describing how security finally subdued Jake with a stun gun. Mark's desk was empty. He had quit suddenly that morning. Emma's desk was still occupied, though she wasn't present. I eventually tracked down Mark's address, a modest rental house with a white Lexus in the driveway. As I approached, Mark stepped out with an armful of clothes. The moment he spotted me, He dropped everything and bolted back inside. I laughed at his panic. Unlike Jake, I wasn't here to pummel anyone. I wanted answers. Inside the house, I found Mark's cell phone, passport, and a sleek laptop left carelessly on the dining table. It was clear he was planning to skip town. Though tempted to smash his car in revenge, I resisted. Unable to completely resist, I deflated one of the tires on Mark's car. It wouldn't stop him from leaving, but it would slow him down and force him to unload the trunk to reach the spare. I figured he'd be looking over his shoulder the whole time, expecting me to appear. Satisfied with the message, I left. At the prison, I stopped by to see Jake, but he was busy dealing with legal matters with his brother. I gave him a quick wave and a supportive smile. It seemed he had the situation under control. Returning home, Mom had dinner underway, and we exchanged a few words before I headed to the office to examine the items I'd taken from Mark's house. Before I could dive into them, Grace and Hannah came back from school. Realizing it was best to address the situation head-on, I decided to explain what was happening before they asked questions. Grace, ever perceptive, greeted me with a curious look and asked why Grandma was staying with us and where Laura was. I gently explained that Laura and I had decided to take some time apart and that she would be staying with her parents for a while. Hannah smirked and declared herself the winner of a bet with Grace. I told you she was cheating, she gloated. Grace denied ever mentioning it, but admitted they weren't oblivious to what was going on. Dad, it was obvious, she said, her tone blunt but not unkind. Mom was cheating, and we figured you'd find out eventually. But honestly, you're way too trusting. Hannah, in a rare show of maturity, placed a hand on my shoulder and tried to comfort me. The scene felt surreal. My 12-year-old daughter consoling me during a family crisis. They then shared incidents that had fueled their suspicions. Remember when Mom and Emma went shopping at King of Prussia? She wouldn't let us come, said it was an adult shopping day. But on Monday, kids at school said they saw her with a guy at Nobles Grove. We didn't believe them until one of the girls showed us a photo on her phone. They also recalled how Tracy Mercer's parents saw Laura, Emma, and 2 men at TGI Fridays in Allentown. We didn't say anything because we thought you'd figure it out, Hannah added. I sat there, dumbfounded. At least dinner with Grandma provided some reprieve. The girls dropped the topic during the meal, and I apologized before dessert. Thankfully, they let it rest for the night. Later, I returned to Mark's laptop and started going through his files. While I didn't find any emails between Laura and Mark, there were interesting exchanges with his friends in Lancaster. One letter stood out. Laura had planned to divorce me after moving to Spain with Mark. She was determined to gain full custody of Grace and Hannah, even if it meant declaring me an unfit father. The letter didn't detail how she planned to achieve this, but hinted it would be severe enough to revoke my visitation rights. The betrayal stung deeply. I'd spent almost my entire life with Laura, only to find out she had become closer to Mark in a year than she had with me in 2 decades. Tears welled up as I printed copies of the damning emails and photos. While none of the images were inappropriate, they were enough to paint a picture of her deceit. Grace peeked into the office and asked if she could call her mom. I couldn't refuse. Grandma stayed with the girls while they spoke with Laura. Later, Mom told me they didn't hold back, blaming Laura entirely for the situation. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. Mark's laptop also revealed that he had accepted a job with an alternative energy project in Spain, starting in 6 weeks. He had prepared everything for the move, except for a passport, which I now had. While he could get a replacement, it would take time. I doubted he'd report me to the police, considering the other evidence I now held. The next morning, the smell of bacon and fresh coffee greeted me. Mom, ever the caretaker, had prepared a hearty breakfast. Grace and Hannah teased me good-naturedly as I cooked their eggs. Before they left for school, I warned them about Laura's plans to label me an unfit parent to gain custody. Don't take sides, I urged. Just be cautious and don't believe everything you hear. Hannah reassured me, her eyes twinkling with confidence. Dad, we're smarter than you think. We love Mom, but we won't let her hurt you. Grace gave me a thumbs up as they headed out. After they left, Mom refilled my coffee and joined me at the table. Relax, she said gently. We're all on your side. Feeling slightly better, I dressed sharply and headed out. With 3 cell phones in my pocket, including Mark's, I made a mental note to get a charger for his device, even if I wouldn't need it for long. At Family Services, I was surprised to recognize the caseworker, Jody Mitchell. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade. Back in high school, she'd been part of the goth crowd, pink hair, black lipstick, and heavy eyeliner. Though now she looked professional and polished, the memory lingered. Jody greeted me with a warm smile. "What can I do for you, John?" Her voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I stammered, mentioning her transformation. She laughed, admitting she'd shed the goth look halfway through college. "It wasn't me," she said. "This feels more authentic." After some friendly banter, I got to the point. "Are there any files or reports on me?" I asked. She nodded, pulling up a record. Jody confirmed there was nothing under my name or Laura's in their system. It seemed we were doing our part as parents and providing a stable environment for Grace and Hannah, rather than mistreating them. I acknowledged having 12-year-old twin daughters and explained that my wife intended to leave me and take them with her. Jody nodded, noting how common such situations were, and asked if I had any idea why Laura might be doing this. I admitted that I had no formal documentation of her actions, but expressed concerns about being set up. Jody explained that while there was no record in their system yet, that didn't mean I was entirely in the clear. She speculated that Laura might be gathering evidence, like medical records or police reports, to submit later. Her suggestion unsettled me, but I appreciated her candor. Reluctantly, I handed Jody a copy of one of Mark's emails. This was retrieved in a less-than-legal way, I confessed. I know it's probably inadmissible, but it paints a clear picture of what's going on. Jody leaned back, studying the letter, and rocked in her chair for a moment before leaning forward. "John, I'm not saying you can't win this, but I'd suggest coming back tomorrow so we can discuss it further." I agreed, glad to have some guidance, and left with the promise to return. As I walked out, she smiled warmly, showing a side of her I hadn't seen before. Without a lawyer on hand, I picked one randomly from the phone book, knowing I needed to act fast. I wasn't sure what Laura might try next, but I needed to protect myself and the girls. I paid the lawyer up front, in cash, for a full package of services. I instructed him to proceed quickly and requested joint custody of the twins, with a push for full custody, if possible. I was willing to pay child support, but adamantly refused to pay alimony. Laura could have the house. It was worth less than the mortgage anyway. As I headed to lunch, Jake called me, asking if he could stay at my place. He needed housing, and I immediately offered to help. We met at Taco Bell, where Jake greeted me with a goofy grin. "What's with the smile?" I asked, curious about his mood. Jake explained that a friend at Community General Hospital had given him some juicy news about Calvin. Apparently, Emma had shown up at the hospital to visit Calvin, completely unaware that his wife and children had arrived shortly before. The resulting chaos required hospital security to escort Emma off the premises. Jake, still processing everything, went by Riverview to confront Emma, but she was nowhere to be found. "She's out of my life for good," he said firmly. When I asked about Calvin's family situation, Jake admitted he didn't know why Calvin didn't live with his wife or why he stayed away from them on weekends. "Honestly," he shrugged, "I don't care anymore." Jake decided to take a week off work to sort out his life. Since Mom was staying at my place, we agreed to figure out where he'd sleep later. For now, he planned to stop by his house, grab some belongings, and leave before Emma returned. On my way to meet my insurance agent, I got a call from Cameron Wilcox, Laura's father. Cameron asked if I could come over to help figure things out. He mentioned that Laura was distraught and that her mother wasn't being helpful. He wanted a family meeting with Laura, her sister Carla, and me. Though I wasn't sure what the meeting would achieve, I agreed to be there in 20 minutes. The atmosphere at the Wilcox home was heavy. I arrived with a folder of evidence but skipped the coffee. They need to get straight to the point. Cameron opened the discussion. "John, Laura feels you're overreacting. She says you were angry and pressured her into saying things that aren't true just to appease you. According to her, she hasn't done anything wrong, and you have no." I could tell Laura was spinning a heavily skewed version of events to her parents. While I understood her hesitation to admit infidelity outright, I deeply resented her attempts to shift the blame onto me. Cameron seemed torn as he asked for the facts to get a clearer picture of what was happening. What exactly do you expect me to do, John? Prove she's lying or admit you made a mistake? I took a deep breath and calmly laid out my case. Laura claims she doesn't have a boyfriend and just shared drinks with some friends from Emma's workplace. But in the last month alone, she's had over 80 phone calls with one of these friends. How many times has she called you or her mother during that same period? Cameron and his wife turned to Laura, who kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Sensing her reluctance to respond, I handed her sister Carla Laura's phone. Read the last text message sent to Mark, right after I asked Laura to leave. Carla's face turned pale as she read aloud. Sorry for the trouble. Love you, Janet. Laura covered her face with her hands, and Cameron slowly shook his head, the weight of the revelation sinking in. I pulled out photos from Laura and Emma's supposed shopping trip to the King of Prussia Mall, which in reality had taken place at Nobles Grove. Cameron asked Laura about the hand-holding in the photos, pointing out that it didn't look like a casual friendship. Tears trickled down Laura's face as I presented more photos, this time from Olive Garden and Red Lobster, further highlighting her dishonesty. While I refrained from bringing up the stains on her underwear, the evidence was damning enough. Cameron sighed, apologized for dragging me into this mess, and shook my hand. I'm sorry for calling you in for this, John, he said. We've been lied to as well. As I left, Laura dissolved into sobs, sounding like a chastened child. Cameron assured me the situation wouldn't be brushed aside. When I got home, Mom and Jake had already set up a fold-out bed in the small room where I kept my computer. Jake had brought a pile of clothes from his house, as Emma hadn't been there when he arrived. However, what really caught my attention was the mail waiting for Laura, a pristine envelope from the passport department. I knew I shouldn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a family passport featuring Laura and the twins. My passport, of course, wasn't included. I immediately recalled Grace and Hannah mentioning a photo session, but I hadn't imagined it was for this purpose. Feeling a surge of anger, I called Cameron. Let Laura know her passport arrived. I told him coolly. If she wants it, Ken can pick it up himself. That's the only way she's getting it. Cameron seemed upset. We've already asked her to find another place to live. We don't know where she's going yet, but she's not staying here. Dinner that night centered around the girls. Grace shyly mentioned that Jody Mitchell from Family Services had visited their school to talk to them together. The meeting lasted long enough for them to miss gym and geography. Both twins noted that Jody seemed to like me, which they found amusing after a 1-hour conversation. Later that evening, Carla called and asked to meet. We arranged to talk at a nearby McDonald's, where she opened up about Laura's situation. Carla didn't mince words, starting with her assessment of Emma's influence. Sarah dragged your wife into this mess, she said firmly. Sarah's affair with Jake was thrilling and romantic to Janet. It made her think her own life with you was too predictable. Loving, yes, but boring. According to Carla, Laura had started her affair with Mark after he joined Riverview Engineering. While Emma and Calvin indulged in secret moments of intimacy, Laura and Mark found themselves alone together, leading to a full-blown affair Laura couldn't, or wouldn't end. Mark captivated Laura with his stories of exciting projects and adventures. When he proposed a move to Spain, she eagerly agreed, seeing it as an escape from her monotonous life with me. The major dilemma, Carla continued, is that she's terrified of losing the girls. She knows you'd never let her take them out of the country. Carla revealed something that shocked me. Laura wasn't just leaving me. She was leaving the girls. She had realized that I would never allow her to take them abroad, so she planned to make me look bad in court to gain an advantage. However, after talking with Grace and Hannah, Laura recognized they were far closer to me than to her. That realization led her to abandon the idea of pursuing custody, provided I agreed to a no-contest divorce. I reluctantly agreed to proceed without fighting it, but when Carla brought up Laura's request for her passport, my suspicions flared. It seemed like Laura might still harbor hopes of taking the girls with her. The family passport, I found, played a critical role in unraveling her intentions. Carla, I said flatly, my coffee's cold, and I'm going home to take a hot shower. Don't call me again. Her face twisted in confusion. John, what the hell is wrong? Why are you so angry? You know exactly what you and your sister have done. Do you two really think I'm that stupid? Go back to her and tell her there's no way she's taking my daughters. And since you've chosen to help her, I'll have to ask you to stay away from my girls too. Carla began speaking into her phone as I left McDonald's, likely calling Laura. I didn't care. I was done with both of them. The next morning, I arrived at the family services office before it even opened. Jody Mitchell walked in with a warm smile and a Starbucks cup in hand. Couldn't stay away from me. Could you? She teased lightly, motioning for me to take a seat. She apologized for not bringing more coffee. I think you already know I spoke with your daughters yesterday, she said. I nodded, managing a faint smile, but for some reason, I felt unsteady, out of my element. Jody's warmth caught me off guard. I realized painfully that I'd never developed social skills with other women. Having been with Laura my whole life, I never had the opportunity or the need. And now, here I was fumbling over my words. Is something wrong, John? Apart from everything? No, I replied, attempting to sound calm, but failing miserably. Jody tilted her head. I wasn't trying to be smart, I added awkwardly. I don't have the words right now. I am sorry, Jody. I think I'd better leave. She stopped me before I could go. Wait, before you go, I wanted to let you know that I'm filing a restraining order against your wife. It won't stop her from seeing or spending time with the girls, but it will prevent her from taking them out of state or denying you access to them. She'll be served before noon. Her words brought a genuine smile to my face. Thank you, I said simply before heading out. I stopped at the nearest Starbucks, letting the aroma of fresh coffee calm my nerves. But as I sat there, my mind swirled with disheartenment and confusion. Everything seemed to be falling apart, even as I tried to hold it together. Eventually, I returned home. Jake informed me that Emma had relocated to her parents' house near AFA. He was planning to return to his own house temporarily while figuring out whether to sell or rent it out. He spent the morning visiting the bank, the insurance company, and a lawyer's office, hoping to recoup some losses from Riverview Engineering. Unfortunately, his lawyer explained that the company had no policy against fraternization, making his case a long shot. While passing the hospital, Jake noticed Calvin being discharged. Calvin's wife, who was completing the paperwork, intercepted Jake to thank him for his help and shared that she was urging Calvin to drop the charges. She explained her years of effort to mend their relationship, though they had seen little success. Later, I sat on the porch nursing a beer. Mom brought out a meatloaf sandwich and shared the drink in silence, mentioning that Dad would be coming for dinner and staying the night. When Jody arrived, Mom quietly retreated into the house, leaving us alone. Jody sat beside me and declined the cold beer I offered. We sat quietly for a moment before she spoke. I served Laura's papers about an hour ago, she said. She was upset, of course. She's staying with her sister for now. I finished the bottle in my hand and sighed. It should feel good, but why does it feel so bad? There's nothing truly good in situations like this, John, she replied softly. Only less bad. I grabbed another beer but hesitated and put it back in the fridge. Could you come in and explain all of this to the girls? I get along with them, but no matter how carefully I phrase things, it might sound like I'm blaming their mother. I don't want to risk pushing them away. Jody nodded. How about 7 tonight? I agreed, and she stood to leave. As she walked back to her car, I couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and apprehension. This was far from over. Halfway to her car, Jody looked back, a small but positive sign, and I smiled. She smiled back before leaving, adding a quiet hopefulness to the night. That evening, she spent significant time with Grace and Hannah, ensuring they were coping well. Meanwhile, Jake and I busied ourselves at his house, clearing out anything that belonged to or reminded him of Emma. Jody started visiting our house several times a week, spending as much time with Mom as she did with the twins. Oddly, she avoided me during these visits, which suited me, but I couldn't deny my curiosity. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, she sat beside me. Before I could find the right words to start a conversation, she spoke first. Do you have any wine? Preferably one with a cork, she asked. I chuckled, explaining that all my wine had screw caps. She found it amusing and asked for something red. So I poured wine into a container that looked more like a jug. As we drank, I cautiously brought up the girls' well-being during her visits. She reassured me they were fine and, surprisingly, admitted she was visiting more to see me than the twins. This confession caught me off guard. "But you barely talk to me," I said, puzzled. She laughed lightly. "I thought maybe you had a rule about fraternizing with clients," she teased. The tension eased, and she brought up tattoos, mentioning her surprise that I hadn't asked about hers yet. I confessed to having 4 tattoos from my high school days, 3 of which were visible and 1 in a more discreet spot. She playfully suggested a game of finding them, keeping her voice low to avoid waking the girls. The night ended quietly, though I suspected the twins might have guessed something was going on. I instructed my lawyer to finalize the divorce papers, which were delivered to Laura at Carla's house. There was no response, and the process dragged on. As weeks passed, my father's health began to decline. Mom spent more time with him, and the girls stayed with her over the summer. By the season's end, Dad moved into a nursing home. Jake and I helped Mom prepare the family home for sale before she moved back in with me. Jody continued visiting frequently, spending evenings with me and taking the twins shopping or out for dinner. The girls no longer seemed to envy the attention I received from Jody, though they clearly knew what was happening between us. Laura's weekly phone calls to the twins were brief and tense, and they didn't even mention them to me. Jake finalized his divorce from Emma and decided to start his own surveying business, inviting me to join him. I didn't have the funds to invest, but Mom stepped in, offering to help with the startup costs. With Medicare covering Dad's expenses, she saw it as an investment in her future and ours. Within 3 months, Jake and I had a small but promising business. A week into the new school semester, Laura visited the twins at school. They had expected to meet Jody in the guidance office and were disappointed to see Laura instead. They tried to remain polite, but found it difficult. Laura apologized, told them she loved them, and said she was leaving for Spain to see the windmills. She promised to send postcards and call them on their birthdays, but the girls were unmoved. Laura never called to inform me she was leaving, but her parents visited the following week. They apologized again for her actions and asked if they could remain a part of the twins' lives. I had no issue with their request, knowing their love for Grace and Hannah was genuine. They also mentioned that Carla was too ashamed to face me, caught between loyalty to Laura and her parents. 2 months later, my divorce was finalized. Jody and I celebrated with dinner at Red Lobster, a rare evening without the girls, who seemed elated at our happiness. We spent the night at a nearby Holiday Inn, and the twins greeted me with beaming smiles the next morning, their approval unspoken but clear. A year later, things were going well. Unfortunately, my father passed away, and Mom considered moving to Florida to live with her sister. The twins suggested Jody move in with us, even if she couldn't cook as well as Grandma. They also insisted they were old enough to have separate rooms now. It was a logical plan, and Mom decided to stay close to her granddaughters. Laura continued to send postcards from Spain, all featuring windmills, along with birthday cards and Christmas gifts. The gifts, though thoughtful, often missed the mark, like embroidered dresses too small for growing teenagers. The girls were surprisingly gracious, taking it in stride. Jake and I built our business successfully, with Gilbert Engineering becoming a major client. Jake was pleased to learn Calvin was now teaching electronics at a vocational school, a significant downgrade. Calvin's marriage had ended, and Emma had remarried and moved to California. As for Mark Sanders, he didn't last 6 months in his job in Spain and returned to the States, his whereabouts unknown. Jake always felt I'd let Mark off too easily. Meanwhile, Jody and I quietly married in Maryland a year later. She was expecting, and the twins were thrilled. They joked about getting a goth baby sister, a private reference they never fully explained to me. As for the postcards from Laura, they continued to arrive with pictures of windmills and vague messages. Whatever the significance of the windmills, it was her mystery to keep.